Hello YouTube, Dave here again. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard that earlier today, Wizards of the Coast announced that they are officially working on the next iteration of the Dungeons and Dragons game, slated for release in 2024, which would coincide with the 50th birthday, I guess you could say, of the D&D game. The original version, Zero Edition, coming out in 1974. And 2024, seems like a really great time to, introduce that next version of the game. That's really all the information that we have at this point. We're still 2.5, close to 3 years away from that date at the time that I'm recording this video. So there's just a lot of stuff that's sort of up in the air or that wasn't really explained clearly. And there was definitely some careful wording being done by the individual sort of making that announcement that, it made things, again, a little bit like nebulous, try to figure out exactly what this next version of the game is going to be. So in this video, because we don't really know a whole lot right now, I think it'd be fun to speculate or to create sort of like a wish list of things that we would personally like to see in the next edition of the D&D game. So one thing though, like I said, this is sort of a, this is purely opinion, purely speculation. I have no inside information. I have like really no idea what they're going to do, and nor does really anybody at this point in time. So, everything that I'm just going to mention in this video, like I said, is pure speculation, but I think it's going to be fun to do. So let's just go with that. But again, please be respectful of other people's preferences or opinions or the things that they like to see. We don't all have to agree. It's fine, but we don't have to take disagreements as personal slights, which usually very rarely happens on this channel, which I'm really happy about. But it has happened a few times at least. So like I said, just, be respectful. And if you really strongly disagree with someone, if you have a YouTube account, you can leave comments on people's videos. You can upload and create your own videos as well. So, feel free to absolutely do that to express your opinions, because I think that's a great thing for, the gaming community in general anyways, for more people to sort of get their voices out there. So, the big question that I see asked a bunch or, sort of speculated on a bunch is what this new version of the game is going to be called, basically. Is it going to be called D&D 6th Edition? Are they going to call it, D&D 5.5? Are they going to rebrand it like 5th Edition Essentials, which they, teased with the Essentials kit, and 4th Edition did a revision that they called their Essentials line. What exactly are they going to do with that? Now, again, this is just pure speculation from my perspective, but I think overall, regardless of what they call it, the changes probably aren't going to be that drastic. They'll definitely be noticeable, and there'll be enough of them to warrant it being its own separate version of the D&D game, whether that be something like 3.5, or if it's a whole new edition like they call it D&D 6th edition. Number one, I doubt they're going to call it 5.5. Just, I'm just absolutely almost 100% positive. I'm like 99% positive that they're not going to call it 5.5 if it is a revision. Hopefully they won't give it a subtitle like revamped or reincarnated, because I've never liked those subtitles. But there's probably something that they could call it. Even if they just call it, D&D 5th edition revised, or updated, or just something along those lines. I would rather that than reincarnated, or 5.5. And 3.5 came out during like the tech bubble. So you had like the .com era and stuff like that. So, naming stuff after like software revisions was kind of like the trendy thing to do, I guess, back then, or at least the corporations thought that was the trendy thing to do. So that's why we got a 5.5, but I don't think or 3.5, but I don't think they're going to call it 5.5. They might find something else to call it. But honestly, they're probably going to go with 6th edition, in my opinion, because 2024 will mark 10 years since the release of D&D 5th edition. And 10 years is a pretty decent amount of time in this industry for an edition to last. In fact, it would be the first edition to last that long since 2nd edition AD&D. 2nd edition AD&D was released in 1989, and it was officially replaced by 3rd edition D&D in 2000. So that one lasted for 11 years. First edition, the first edition is a little bit trickier to pin down because some people mark the beginning dates differently, because the Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and then Dungeon Master's Guide released in different years. Some people refer to first edition starting when the Monster Manual came out, which was in 76, I think, or 70, yeah, I think it was 76. Some people think it was when the Player's Handbook came out, and some people think it was when all three books were finally available to the public. So, you'll see differences between 676 and 78. I kind of lean towards 78 when the actual full rule set was out, but regardless, it lasted for about the same amount, like 10, 11, 10, 11 years is sort of like the lifespan for first edition AD&D. But then third edition only lasted for 3 years before it was revised to 3.5. Third edition coming out in 2000, 3.5 releasing in 2003. In 2008, we saw the release of fourth edition, and fourth edition technically didn't end until 2014, so it technically had a 6-year lifespan. But realistically, once the playtest era started for D&D 5e, the playtest starting in 2012, that was really the end of the the fourth edition product line. Once that came out, any books that were released were either for the playtest or they were edition neutral. In fact, the Elminster's Guide to the Forgotten Realms didn't even use like the main D&D logo that was going on at the time. Maybe on the spine it did, but not on the front cover. So really, honestly, realistically, D&D 4th edition ended in 2012. So it lasted for 4 years in terms of actual regular releases, but technically it was the current edition until 5th edition came out in 2014. But 2014 to 2024, it's a good run, and I think it's a perfect time to look at introducing something new. So I'm not upset with it. Like, a couple of years ago, if they would have announced that a new edition was, a year or so away, I would have been. But when I originally did my speculation video on 5th edition back in 2014, one of the things that I had hoped for was that we would get at least a decade out of D&D 5th edition, and by the sounds of it, that's exactly what we're going to get. So I think that's going to be great. In terms of what the new edition is going to be, like I said, there's going to be some differences, but I kind of suspect it's going to be, even though they'll probably call it 6th edition, I suspect it will probably be like a 3.0 to 3.5 or first to 2nd edition AD&D type of scenario, where there's differences, but overall the materials are still going to be compatible enough with one another that you should be able to use books from 5e and the new version pretty seamlessly, and vice versa. So I don't think it's going to be, like I said, a ground-shattering, drastic change that we've seen in the past. I think it's just going to be sort of like a gradual improvement, like we had seen from first to second, or 3.0 to 3.5. But, so that's my theory. So now let's talk about what I think would be really cool to see, some things I'd like to see in the new version of the game, and we'll sort of go from there. So the first thing that I think would be really cool, it's unlikely that they're going to do, and in fact it's almost, assuredly not going to happen, but one thing I think would be kind of cool would be for them to continue running both editions simultaneously. And that sounds crazy at first, but it's not without precedent. During the era of 1st and 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, you had Basic Expert being released as sort of separate rule sets with their own separate product lines, their own supplements, their own modules. So they were two different versions of the game that were coexisting at the same time. And with 5th edition, I think it's a great version of the game for beginners. Like, I think it's a really friendly version, unintimidating rule set to get new players into. And that's something that I think we saw quite a bit with 5th edition. There was sort of a big explosion of new people becoming interested in the tabletop RPG hobby. And, not that's necessarily, unprecedented, or, that's never happened, or like, it's like a wholly, like crazy new thing, because 3rd edition had its bit of a boom period as well. But 5th edition was a simple enough rule system that it wasn't intimidating, it wasn't overwhelming, it was, quick to learn and to grasp. And I think it helped, maintain interest beyond just that first little bit of, oh, this seems kind of interesting, I kind of want to try it out. So I think, the fifth edition rules as they are perfect for that. And if someone was expressing an interest into getting into tabletop role-playing games in, this year, 2021, or sort of in this era of time, fifth edition is the one that I would likely recommend because it's a great entry level game. And then once you get used to that, if you decide that you want something a little bit more complex, then there's other, additions or systems that, you can move on to. But 5e as it is a great way to get your foot in the door. So keeping that at the same time and then having like an advanced Dungeons and Dragons version of the game coming out at the same time could give that other portion of the fan base that wants sort of more complex or crunchier rule systems. It would give them the opportunity to have like that game while still maintaining the easy to learn version of the game to get new players involved. Now, they don't necessarily need to keep releasing physical books for the basic version of a D&D game, but they could do like what they have now, where they have their basic rule supplements online that you can download and you can run the game with that. And I think having it so that you can do a complete 20-level campaign with just those PDFs is a great idea. When it comes to like monsters and stuff like that, like adventures, I feel like the next version will be close enough that you could probably run those adventures with either version of the game. And another thing that we have precedent for is having online supplements for stat blocks so that you can release an adventure that's essentially edition neutral and then have PDFs that you can download for free that give you the creature stats for the different editions. So you can still support 5th edition as well as, as well as the new 6th edition version of the game. So you can sort of have both of those things going on simultaneously. The adventures could be designed so that they could be run with either system. And if you need the stat blocks, you can just get them, online. And with the, the popularity of like D&D Beyond and Roll20 and sort of these like digital services and, people unlike me getting more comfortable using technology at the gaming table, the PDFs really isn't like the issue that it is for someone like me who's like very technologically inept. So I think that'd be kind of cool way for them to go with it. Again, highly unlikely, but I think it would be a great thing to do. So with that out of the way, what are some of the things that I personally would like to see in the new version of the game? Again, this is just 100% personal things that I would like to see. I don't think that these are, definitive. I don't think these are what everyone should agree with. We all have our own opinions. We all have things that we want out of the system. So this is just my own personal opinion. Again, feel free to disagree. Just, be respectful about it because it's a game. It's supposed to be fun. We don't need to get so worked up or take things personally. And not saying that that's an issue overly on this channel. It's happened a few times, not a bunch, but I do see it in other places. So let's just, keep it calm, respectful, and it's a game. So if something I say that I would love to see taken out of the game is one of your favorite aspects of the game, that's not me attacking you personally. It's just, my opinion versus your opinion, and it's up for Wizards of the Coast to decide which one they want to go with, right? So the first thing that personally I would love to see with the new version of the D&D game is, and this is completely at odds with my, what I'd love to see in 5th edition, but honestly what I would love to see for 5th edition, or for the next edition of D&D, would be more player options more regularly. So more frequent player updates or, new player oriented books coming out. So with 5th edition, we currently only have two really, we really only have two books that have been designed for like new players with new class information or options, and really heavily focused on new class options, updated mechanics and stuff like that. There's only been two in the 7 years that this game has been around. So that's, and the first one, Xanathar's Guide, I think was 3 years, 2 or 3 years after 5th edition release before we really got our first new player character options. And that's just too long. Like, in the past, they really overdid it and they flooded the market. But I think with 5th edition, they overcorrected a little bit too much and the market kind of got starved out on new class options. So I would like to see, even if we had just have one book a year come out in, November or December based off of, several months worth of, play test and stuff like that, but just, get new stuff out to the players on a regular basis. To have 2 books in 7 years just feels like, again, not very much. You could argue that, Volo's Guide and, Mordecai's Tome of Foes have player stuff in there as well, but those are new races versus actually having new classes. Another thing that I would really love to see is more classes introduced in the next version of the game. Now, obviously, the core rulebook should stick to the main core rulebook classes. You could argue that maybe the Warlock doesn't need to be in the core rulebook, but it's a popular class. It's not my favorite class, but I think they should stick with the Player's Handbook, should stick with those traditional classes like Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. Like, that's fine, but let's have new classes come out. 4th edition had a ton of new classes come out. Like, each of the Player's Handbooks had like whole, full progression classes out. Like you had the Warlord, which is one of my favorite classes that version of the game released, and the Battlemaster for 5th edition is okay, but it's still nowhere near as good as that Warlord was. I thought the Warlord was great. You had like the Avenger, you had, like the Psionic classes. So I would just love to see more full 20 level classes be released for D&D 5th edition. Like, there's each of the class, or 6th edition, or whatever they're going to call it, the next edition. With 5th edition, like, each class has usually like some sort of archetype choice that they can make. So you have things like the Fighter being able to pick the Battlemaster or the Eldritch Knight, or you have the Arcane Trickster for the Rogue, or the Assassin, or the Shadow Dancer, the Arcane Archer. So you've got all kinds of stuff along those lines for those archetypes, and I think those work really, really well. But that shouldn't be the only way that you introduce like new player options. Some things just deserve to be their own class, and I would just personally, again, I would just love to see more of that. With D&D 5th edition, we have seen precisely one new class introduced in the 7 years since its release, and that was the Artificer, which was printed in 2 separate books. So, that's just, there's just not a ton of like new things for players to try out and to get excited over and to sort of get into. So having like new classes, I think, would be a great way to go with that. But keep the archetype system, because I think that works really well. But instead of having it just be like what you use instead of new classes, what I would love to see for archetypes is like archetypes take over the method of multi-classing in the next version of the D&D game. It's no secret, I hate multi-classing in modern D&D. 4th edition is a standout from that because they didn't have multi-classing. They had a feat system where you took feats that were multi-class feats that would give you class features from like the class that you were multi-classing into, and I liked that system a hell of a lot more than what I like, or than the way that they do it for they did it for 3rd edition, and definitely the way they're doing it for D&D 5th edition. So I think that like the archetype system is great for multi-classing, and you can definitely do like multi-class archetypes for all the different classes so that they can sort of fit in with if you wanted to make like a Mystic Thurge, for example, you could have like the multi-classing option archetype for wizards or clerics, where they can sort of take that opposite version. So I think that that's great for that, but just the regular multi-classing, I feel, was just something that was overly done and sort of poorly thought out, and definitely abused. So I would like to see the end of multi-classing and a move towards using archetypes for, like trying to theme your character like around a multi-class instead. And again, it's not without precedent because Pathfinder 2nd edition does it and does it great. So it's definitely something that can be done, and it's personally what I would like to see because I really don't like multi-classing. Another thing that I would like to see in the next version of the D&D game is more feats, more access to feats, but overall I want the feats to go back to being sort of smaller benefits. Feats in 5th edition, while it's technically an optional rule, I've known like a lot of people will get upset with a DM if they say, I really don't like feats, so I don't really want to use them in my game. So it's an optional rule that feels forced, and so I think it's something that it should just be part of the game, because feats are popular. Feats have been popular since, third edition. But they, like I said, they get a little over the top in fifth edition. For some of them, not all of them, but for some of them, they kind of do. So I would like to see you have like more feats and just have feats be part of your regular character progression, the same way that attribute bonuses are. But again, just sort of scale them back a little bit. So you can have feats that give you like a +1 or +2 on certain checks or skill rolls or saving throws against certain things or, situational attack rolls. Like there's stuff like that that you can do without having it to be like, a single feat that allows you to like ignore cover, get a massive bonus to damage and, stuff like that, right? So I would like to see them scale what the feats give back, but give you more of them and have like more access to it and just have it be part of the regular character progression. I've talked to people that they just give you access to feats at certain levels instead of having you have to give up your attribute bonus to choose a feat, which isn't really as much of a drawback as it sounds because most feats, or at least a lot of feats, they still give you a bonus to an attribute. So yes, you can argue it's not set, it's not when you could choose, it's set, like you have to take the attribute bonus to the one, but you're still supposed to be giving up your stat boost in total, like that's what you give up to get the feat. So when the feat still gives you a smaller stat boost, you're still getting a stat boost. As you can tell, I really don't like 5th edition feats. But yeah, I've known people that would just at certain levels will just say, okay, you can choose a feat. You can start with a feat at first level, or you can choose a feat, at like 5th, 10th, and 15th level, or So I've seen people sort of take that approach as well. So again, having more feats, more access to them, but just less powerful overall, I think would be a fun thing to have. And going back to playing third edition D&D. Just based on the feats in the player's handbook, I kind of missed that version of the game. And 4th edition, again, you had a ton of feats in 4E, but they were all small, numeric, like small bonuses or, sort of like smaller effects overall. So that's something that I sort of like to see, in the next version of the game. Another thing that I would really like to see in the next version of the game is more crunch. And like there was a period of time where like what I wanted was what 5th edition was. Like I wanted to get away from all the situational modifiers and bonuses and penalties and all that stuff. But as the years have gone on, I kind of miss that. It was a big part of the game for a long time. And advantage and disadvantage is a great system. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's an absolutely fantastic system. But there are certain situations where, truthfully, just getting a bonus to your roll makes more sense than letting you roll twice and taking the better or the worse of the two. So, like, for example, like certain conditions could just give you like penalties to like attack rolls or saving throws of a certain type or skill checks of a certain type, right? Instead of it being like a full-on disadvantage, because like getting, -2 to a roll just doesn't feel as bad as having to roll twice. With a range of numbers from 1 to 20 twice and then taking the weaker of the two. So I'd like to see some more stuff like that sort of come back into the game. I'd kind of like to see things like, experience point penalties and stuff like that return to the game. So if you do multi-classing, I would like to see like the balanced multi-classing of 3.0 or 3rd edition kind of come back, where if you're going to do it, you have to sort of keep your levels kind of close to one another, or it's harder for you to level up. So I'd kind of like to see that sort of stuff maybe come back into the game. And again, it's one of those things, you can do it. You can absolutely do it, but there are consequences for making some of those decisions. And also, as far as experience points go, I would rather first level characters just be more powerful than have the current like 1st through 3rd level progression that 5e has. I really don't like the way that 5e handles 1st level characters, because 4th edition I think did it really well. 4th edition 1st level characters, they were hardy enough that they could last for a couple of fights before they really had to worry about resting for the night. They had abilities that they could do in every fight. So it's not like, in the past where your 1st level wizard had one spell, and once they cast that, they were just a really, like, they were basically a commoner at that point, right? Because they had 1d4 hit points and they couldn't wear armor and their attack bonus sucked. So, I would, so I'd like to see first level characters maybe get a little bit more of a boost. And it could be something simple like, first level characters in the new version of the game, go back to what 4th edition did, where they can add their con score to their hit points, right? Because you already have class abilities that, like cantrips that you can use on limited number of times, or you have abilities that you get back after a short rest in 5th edition. And I think that works really well. But like, just make the first level characters a bit tougher to start off and have a slower progression. Because in 5e, character reaches level 3 before any other edition of the game ever got you to level 2. So I don't like that approach. It's like, either not have levels 1 and 2 and just start off with a character of 3rd level, because the D&D adventures for 5e, they pretty much all start at 3rd level, right? Like, that's where the real story tends to start for most of them, especially in the middle years there that we've had. So just make first level characters tougher and have a longer progression period, I think would be kind of nice. Because like, looking at something like AD&D, where it would take a very long time for certain characters, or even like the rule cyclopedia for certain characters to gain levels, to the point now where every other session you're supposed to gain a level. I don't know, it feels like you're gaining stuff a little bit too fast. So I would love to see a slower progression, in terms of like the experience points. Why not go back to like, 2,000 experience points for level 2, right? Personally, again, my own personal opinion, but I kind of like the longer progression. And with longer character progression, there's more you can do in those middle range of levels. That's kind of like the sweet spot for RPG or for like Dungeons and Dragons editions anyway. Right? Like, you have a lot of games that, they'll go up until like, 10th, 12th, maybe like 13th or 14th level. But then they sort of, the characters get overpowered, or it just doesn't, like, a lot of games sort of drop off. And the official adventures kind of reflect that, because we've only had a single adventure book released so far, that supports up to level 20 characters. Everything else has been like 15th or 16th level, or most of the recent ones have been, like levels 1 through 9 or 1 through 10. Right, so if you have a longer character progression, you get to spend more time in that sweet spot, where it's just, historically speaking, the most fun to play your characters. That's something that I really like to see. Another thing, and this is probably going to be the last thing, at least for now. We might do another one of these videos in a little bit when we start getting more like information, or when a playtest comes out. But one other thing that I would really love to see in the new version of the D&D game is tougher monsters, or monsters that justify their challenge rating a hell of a lot better than the current ones do. So I've run adventures or gaming sessions where the players fought a creature that was 6 or 7 challenge rating, like, their challenge rating was 6 or 7 higher than their actual level, and the players held their own just fine. There were fights against dragons, where the dragon, even a dragon that was, again, like 7, challenge rating higher than their level, would have gone down in just a few rounds had I not also doubled their hit points, sort of thing. So I would love to see tougher monsters overall. And I think, again, this is just me, my own personal experiences, but from my experiences and the experiences of the people that I've sort of done games with, the most enjoyable combats are the ones that feel dangerous. Now, it's not to say that you have to have every enemy be like this, deadly threat or deadly challenge. But again, going back to 4th edition, and I know people are going to hate that I keep going back to that, but 4th edition, again, had a really great system for sort of scaling monsters to make them more or less powerful, to sort of, pad out or to make an encounter more challenging. So bring back minions. Minions were great. Minions were sort of like disposable fodder troops that you could cut through, like just this swath of destruction as you made your way through them. But they still hit hard enough and had enough of an attack bonus that you couldn't completely ignore them. Like, you had to deal with them because they could gang up on you. Because one minion, or four minions, was the equivalent to one regular monster. So you could have like four orc minions that would take the place of a single orc warrior. And I did a couple of videos before looking at like minions and elites and stuff like that, and converting that into 5th edition. So I think that would be a great system to bring back, because that way you don't necessarily need to overly change the way that you design your monsters. You just have a mechanic where you can, make them elite, so you double their health, right? You give them a slightly higher armor class, slightly higher to hit, slightly higher to, attack damage, stuff like that, but still use sort of the base stats as, what you sort of modify. And then you could have the solo creature. So if there's a creature that is supposed to generally fight a party by themselves, like a dragon or a beholder, or like a Baelor, or pit fiend, or stuff along those lines, you could have, again, them be tough enough that they can really survive a decent assault from the player characters and give it back. Right. In 3rd edition D&D, I ran an encounter with a beholder, and the player characters were 10th level. The beholder's challenge rating was 13. So that seemed like an appropriate time to use that beholder against the player characters. The beholder rolled low for initiative, the players rolled high, and the beholder never got to take a single action. And this was, again, a creature that was, challenge rating several, magnitudes higher than the rest of the party, but they just destroyed it. They obliterated it. And I've had situations like that in 5th edition too, especially when you get to those higher levels where, like, an ancient dragon sounds tough, sounds powerful, but compared to what the players can do on average in a turn, they go down really quick. Like, for me, I've had to double, or even sometimes if it's a solo, I have to like multiply, triple, or quadruple a monster's hit points just so that I could get to round 4 of combat. So I would like to see, a system in place where you can do that, where you can have that. And again, just having elite modifications and solo modifications as part of the core version of the rules, I think would go a long way towards doing that. So you could use the 5th edition monster manual, but just have some guidelines for modifying them to make them tougher. And so those are basically the things that I would like to see. There's a few other things that there's not really a lot for me to really talk about. For example, I'd love to see concentration changed in the next version of the game. At first, I thought it was great because it prevented you from stacking too many spells at the same time. But in practice, after years, I've felt like it sort of makes it almost not worth playing a support character, because there's some great support spells that you may want to cast and use to buff up the party or buff up your NPCs, but they're both concentration, so you can't use them both, right? So I love to see concentration changed. Even if it was like, as you progress in level, there are certain points where you can, improve, like improved concentration or greater concentration, where you can add a second spell or a third spell, to the list of ones that you can concentrate on at a given time. So I'd love to see that maybe be a part of the game, but that's basically all I can think of at this point in time. So let me know in the comments below, what are some of the things that you're looking for in the next version of the D&D game? Do you think it's going to be 5.5? Do you think it's going to be D&D 6th edition? Do you think, regardless of what they call it, it's going to be a minor revision? Do you think it's going to be a drastic revision? Let me know in the comments below. And I always love to hear your guys' opinion. Again, just keep it civil. We're all here to have fun, right? So thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for letting me, sharing your opinions and thoughts in the comments. Like, that's always great. I always love seeing it. And I will see you all next time. Take care.